Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for spending this beautiful evening this evening with us to go over the Southeastern infrastructure study. My name is Tom Coleman. I've been the project manager for staff for this project. A couple housekeeping items. There are bathrooms in the middle of the hall to your right if anyone needs to use the restroom. We do have a sign-in sheet. If you signed in, if we have any communications coming out of this meeting, if you sign in, we will make sure that you receive those communications. A couple introductions. We do have from the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Vaughters and Mr. Lau here, and from the Planning Commission, Mr. Patuk. And your primary host for this evening will be Timmons Consultants, and I will turn this over to Timmons.
All right, thank you, Tom. Good evening. Thank you for coming out again. My name is Steve Schmidt. I'm the project manager on this project for Timmons Group. With me tonight from Timmons is Paul Trapp. He's our principal in charge in the back. We also have our sub-consultants with us today, Mike Callahan and Jeremy Goldstein from 3TP. You'll hear from both of them throughout this process. We're going to give you a presentation, then we're going to do a little bit of an open house. We've got some boards around. We've got some questions for you to have input on. You're going to hear a little bit tonight about the model that we've built, and we're going to have examples of that to play with up here as well as if you want after that. So, yeah, with that, so this is the I just put it down. As you all remember, we met back in March for the first meeting, the first citizen meeting. This is the Goochland County Southeastern Infrastructure Study, and just a little bit of what this is and isn't, right? So this study it's all about using local data, local levels of service to better project the infrastructure growth in this portion of the county. We are focused solely on the Southeastern Infrastructure Study area of the county. You'll see a map in a few minutes with a circle of it, or it's a circle in the back as well. What do we want to do? What are we hoping to gain from this? We want to be able to forecast reasonable future development scenarios in order to gauge the impact on the infrastructure, the roads, the water sewer, the schools, fire and rescue, and we also have some tax base in there as well. This is an analytical analysis, data informed, using local knowledge where we can, and it's a tool to better support infrastructure planning. Okay, what is this not? This is not an update to the 2035 comprehensive plan that was approved back in 2015. This is not intended to dictate land use policy. We are making no recommendations on any parcel to change from this to that. That is not part of this study. It's not a proposal for any new regulations or taxes in the study area. How did we get here? How did this study come about? The Major Thoroughfare Plan, which was adopted in 2018, designated this area for future analysis. And the previous land use planning efforts have identified the need for better infrastructure capacity analysis in this area of the county. This is a map from that thoroughfare plan, and literally, they drew a circle around this area, right? I know you probably can't read the legend up top. That's just the map straight out of the plan. But the point of this is the thoroughfare plan left this area, drew a circle, and said, study in the future. And that's what we're doing now. Why is it needed? As you all are aware, Goochland County is growing. The market is strong. People and businesses want to locate here. Goochland County is the second fastest growing county in the state since 2020. These are numbers through the end of 2023. Right behind New Ken, they're seeing a 5.1% growth. So we need to plan for it. The study's goals. We need to address the considerations in the face of that growth pressure. We want to help direct growth to the designated growth areas as identified. We want to help protect the county's finances while maintaining the county's services. And then we also want to plan for the designated growth areas so that we can protect the rural and natural parts of the county. We also want to better understand the impacts of growth on the infrastructure planning, right? We want to understand that if this type of development comes, well, then we need this road. If that comes, we need this school. We want to be able to understand and plan for those things in the future. This is an empirical, data-driven guide, foundation to guide the supervisors and county staff when considering future land use plans, when considering future infrastructure decisions. We want to provide a tool, we want to provide data to the county, to the board, to make those decisions moving forward. So the southeastern portion of the county, again, that white circle is our study area in and around the Patterson and 288 interchange. It's been identified as a growth area in the comprehensive plan with the goal to protect the rural area by directing growth to the areas where we can plan the infrastructure. Right? If we can plan to grow here, we can help leave the rest of the county as is. So this is straight out of the 2035 comprehensive plan. These are guiding factors for the whole county. We want to promote balanced development and preservation of rural character. We want to anticipate and prepare for population growth. We want to guide development to village areas and those designated growth areas. We want to ensure new development does not exceed the county's ability to provide needed services and infrastructure. And lastly, we want to protect natural, scenic, and historic resources. This is what the comprehensive plan is telling us on how to plan for the future of Goochland, and we took these things to heart with this study. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Callahan from 3TP. He's going to tell us, you guys remember we asked questions, if you were here the last time, on what you all want to see, what residents want to see from the county. So I'm going to turn it over and hear what it would hear from you all.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, everybody. Mike Callahan here. Who was here back in March? Show of hands. Okay, so about a third of you. I'm going to go over some of what we heard and how it informed the way we went about this study. We had a meeting right in this room, and we used something called Mentimeter, where people use their phones to vote on questions that we asked, and we were able to get some real-time feedback and use it in the analysis that we did. So we asked questions like, how important are different things to you, such as workforce housing, economic development, protecting rural areas, etc. Here you see that high-quality county services, like fire and rescue, for example, and preservation of rural areas and high-quality schools were the three top vote getters. We also asked a question about the balance in local tax revenue between residential and commercial land uses. So about 80% of the county's locally generated revenues come from residential. It's a pretty high percentage. And we asked, how important is it that more comes from commercial to alleviate some of that burden on residential? Again, 1 to 5, so a bit more than half, towards being very important. We also wanted your input into the land use scenarios that we developed. So we looked at my colleague Jeremy is going to explain in a moment, different land use scenarios to understand how they would affect infrastructure in this area. And as part of that, we wanted your help in telling us what to measure, what's important. This is your study, it's the county study, and we wanted to make sure it was looking at the things that matter to you. And so this is a list of 8 items ranked in order from what the community told us back in March, with commercial tax revenue being at the top, acres developed 2nd, new housing units 3rd, water use 4th, and vehicle trips 5th. And there was actually a pretty big drop off after those 5. And then we did a kind of open-ended question, and it was represented on the screen as a word cloud. That's what this is called here. So word salad, is that what you said? Yeah, so the bigger words are the ones that people said more in their responses. So we asked the question, what is the greatest concern you have for this study area, this southeastern corner of the county? Density was top concern. Traffic, schools, roads, fire and rescue, water, safety, sewer. Again, the bigger words are the ones repeated again and again. So we really took to heart your input. We used it in the work that we did, and I hope tonight as you look at some of the results, you'll see that reflected in what we did. So just very high level here, an overview of our process. 3TP, my colleague Jeremy Goldstein is going to talk in just a moment about how we developed some different land use scenarios. And we did this in order to estimate the impacts of different ways this area could develop in the future on fire and rescue, schools, roads, water, and sewer, the things that you told us mattered to you. And so I'm going to now turn it over to Jeremy to go into a little more detail about how we did this.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. So to start, we had a framework for what it was that we were trying to accomplish, and we wanted to make sure then that we put that into process with some thoughtfulness about what the analytical portion should do and should not. So the first thing we really wanted to make sure of was that it was analyzing these different scenarios in a really like quantitative but transparent way. We thought it was really important that people be able to see what it is that went into this model, went into the scenario analysis, and could adjust, comment as need be. So we wanted to make sure that was true. What we didn't want to do was to have this be something that in and of itself made recommendations for what the future should be like. That's not what we're trying to do. Remember from one of the earlier slides talked about how this isn't meant to drive policy. We wanted to make that very clear through this tool as well. And we wanted to make sure that people understood we weren't making recommendations specifically about like how much growth should really be in this area. That's not what this study is about. It's about informing how growth has impacts on infrastructure. That's the real goal here, but we wanted to put real numbers to that instead of just words. And being a numbers person, that appealed to me, so that's where I come in. So what we developed was a tool, an analytical tool, a spreadsheet-based tool that creates different scenarios to help the county estimate those infrastructure impacts. So what we're trying to accomplish here is a means by which we can enter in the various assumptions and inputs that would go into any projection about the future. What's this place going to be like in 20 years? Well, there's any number of things you got to sort of be thinking about to make that projection, but all of them are based on really fully unknowable things about the future, but where you can say, here are the assumptions that went into that idea about the future, and here's kind of where the data came from. We're trying to make sure that that's very transparent, which is why we're going to be talking to you about it in detail this evening. That's part of the reason. And then we also wanted this to be a leave behind that the county could be using moving forward through the future as this region changes, as priorities change, as different ideas emerge. We wanted this to be a tool that they could continue to use. It doesn't end with tonight. It lives on in perpetuity. So since we're going to do this sort of like modeling process, we have to have this very important caveat about modeling, which is that we can't predict the future, right? It's not a surprise to anybody here. And the model itself isn't designed really to do that. It's really meant to inform long-range planning. It gives us different ways of looking at the future. Well, what if things grew like this? What are the implications of that? What if they grew like that? What are the implications of that? So that's what we're trying to do. But to do it really well, I think really requires inputs from two main sources. One, which is just kind of research and in institutional knowledge, but the other is in local discussion with local people who have local intuition, local knowledge, and we did a great deal of that, and we'll talk a little bit about a little more about that here in a moment. So what we settled on for this purpose, for at least this first iteration of this tool, was to create these scenarios, these 3 different scenarios, all of which you could say are plausible, they're reasonable, they're based in something that at least makes sense, has some rational nexus, but none of them are necessarily anticipated to be the real future. What they're really designed to do is to give us different slices of what like the future would be like and what the changes in the infrastructure capacity, needs, issues, etc. So that as we, as Goochland grows and changes, we have a way of preparing for that, analyzing that, etc. And that's what this tool does. It's important to note here that what we're really talking about this tool doing is projecting growth on parcels that don't have anything on them. So if we're in the study area, you'll see a map here in just a moment. You're in the study area and there's something there now, there's a house, there's a business. The model effectively doesn't care about it. It's like, it's great, it's there, it's going to stay there in perpetuity, no change. What we really care about are the places that don't have something on it. What would happen if such and such a thing went on it? What if new residents went there? What if new businesses went there? So it's only those undeveloped ones. Okay, so we had three scenarios, 3 different sort of style of ideas. The first one we're calling comprehensive plan and existing pattern. What it really means is that we're sort of copying and pasting, as it were, the things that are out there now, effectively keep spreading out into the undeveloped parcels, but informed by the future land use that the comprehensive plan has. So the places that were sort of designed to be more economically focused are likely to have more economically focused kinds of businesses, but that look like the kinds of businesses that are out there now. So that's what that one is. And I think that's useful, at least. It's a little bit easier, especially when you're thinking about the future of a fairly large area, what it looks like, and what you'll see some of like the numerical outcomes of this kind of growth. I think it helps to sort of think of this. I think it's the easiest one to see in your mind's eye, like, oh, look, it's that, except spread out more. I think so. I think it helps to sort of ground this, and that may be something useful as you're seeing Steve go through some of the results. That's kind of the one maybe that's easiest to get your mind around, and then these others you can use for comparison. The second scenario was one with more of an economic development lean. So what if this place grew in a way that was much more commercially focused, say, than residentially focused? That's its idea. So it's got, as you can see, it's got some residential in it, but there's more like maybe an office, light industrial, et cetera, et cetera. And the model itself is flexible enough to, you can enter in yourself, oh, well, I'd like to see X%, this kind of use. So that if you wanted to make changes in the future, it's easily done. The third one we're calling a mixed use kind of leaning scenario. I think maybe some folks are familiar with the concept of mixed use. Where like maybe on one site there's like, oh, the ground floor is retail, and then there's a residence above and off. So we're not talking about that kind of mixed use. What we're really talking about is like in the entire area, the kinds of uses that you would find aggregated up would be a wider range of like the kinds of places you would live, work, and play, say. So there's maybe a little bit more residential along with some commercial uses. There's maybe a little bit more retail, things like that. So you can just think of this as maybe like a bit more of a diversity of uses and more of a mix. So not so much about any individual site, but just the collective. All right, so now if we're making decisions about growth for the future, it's got to go on like real land. And one of the important things about this, we really wanted to make sure people understood and was clear about our methodology, is there are no recommendations about individual, like property owners' parcels of like their own property, their own individual parcel of land. There's nothing in the model that says, at this address, we expect it to be this kind of use. We didn't want to do that. It's not our business. I mean, somebody owns that. But what we did still want to do was come up with some way of making a more aggregated estimation about the future. So we did that through this idea of land base, taking a collection of parcels that maybe have something in common. Sometimes it is, oh, they're all owned by the same group, for instance, or they're all bounded by the same infrastructure, something like that. Like they usually have something in common. And then what we're saying is, within all the available land within that space, all the vacant land that's developable within that space, what proportion of it might be residential? What proportion of it might be commercial? It's not assigning to any individual place. It's the collective and what proportion of it. Does that make sense? I do think this is an important thing to understand. Like, there's really nobody here that's trying to assign individual uses to individual parcels. But we did then have to make assumptions about what went into each of those land bays. And so all of the rest of this work here is really informed by these kind of like these, some of these like guiding principles, mostly about, as we talked a little bit before, like this is the research and conversation. So we had a lot of discussions with existing landowners interested in what their thoughts are about the future and what they were thinking about doing. We'd like to represent that as much as we could. Discussions with county staff, local experts, and others to make sure that we're getting as much sort of local intuition and knowledge as we can get. And then we also included like local plans and policies, so what guidance was there, and then some sort of like market trends that we wanted to inform this. So we wanted to try to make these as realistic as we could, even recognizing, of course, we're never going to be exactly right. We just would want to be as least wrong about the future as we can be. So any one of these models is going to have a whole host of kind of assumptions that have to go into it, and I'm going to give you a taste of some of these and try to tax your patience and get into the details of this. But the primary one is just like land use mix. So the map is back there still. In this land bay, for each of these land bays, individual decision made in each land bay, what percentage is residential? And within that, what percentage of the residential is single family or multifamily? what percentage is commercial, and within that, what percentage is one kind of commercial use or another kind of commercial use or another kind of commercial use, right? So we had to make all of those assumptions. And again, we wanted to build a tool that would allow for the flexibility to make changes, upgrades, adjustments over time. So that's what it's still doing. The next thing we needed to think about was intensity, which really just means like, by means of example, you can have a single family house in a rural area that takes up a lot more space than a single family house in a more urban area. So we had to say, okay, well, what are we really thinking about for intensity? So, you can build more single family units in places that have utility connections than you can in places that use well and septic. So we want to take that kind of stuff into consideration. And there's similar versions kind of for commercial uses, but I hope you get the idea here. We also needed to make some assumptions about market trends informed by county staff, which is incredibly helpful to help us try to avoid putting in things that are very unlikely to appear anytime, certainly in the near future. Kind of the best example of that is this, like the old kind of 9 to 5 office building, suburban office park, for instance, which right now there is no clear market for, and no one's really anticipating in the immediate future. So let's try not to then say to populate this thing with like a lot of suburban office parks. And then last, we wanted to keep these things sort of grounded to other people's thoughts about the future. I think most specifically, the University of Virginia has this sort of like population analysis center called Weldon Cooper Center. They do population forecasts for every county and sort of, like major city in Virginia. They're one of the ones who think that Goochland County is going to be one of the fastest growing places in all the state. And so we wanted to be able to say, well, let's be able to compare, our models, our scenarios, expectations about population growth, and we'll be able to compare it to somebody else's forecast to say, well, how does this fit? What proportion of their expected growth would be accommodated in this study area under this scenario? I think it helps to give it some context. It's one thing to say we expect 1,000 people here. It's another thing to say we expect it's 1,000, but the county's supposed to have 40,000 people. That's a made-up number. Sorry, I want to make clear. That's a totally made-up number. But whatever the thing is, it helps to have some context about how much growth is being handled in the area. And then the last sort of piece about the weeds is we needed to find some way to translate just the idea of like growth. We're expecting some number of houses with capacity. Well, how much does a house impact infrastructure? Right, like every house needs, uses some amount of water, uses some amount of sewer, takes some amount of trips, pays, such amount of money into the tax base, has some number of kids that go to school, etc. So what we did then was to find, the numerical equivalent of how much water is there for each house, how much water is there for every business, how many trips are being taken, etc. So a couple of examples, for trips, for instance, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, it's a national institution, has what they call trip generation handbook, and they've done all the research to determine what is the average or the typical number of trips taken for basically every kind of residential style and every kind of commercial style. So we just use that, so we're just going to use their number. They say the average is 6.2 trips per single family household. Cool, then we're going to use 6.2 trips per single family household. Sometimes we could use things that were more locally created. The utilities plan had some estimates for how much water and sewer use there is on residential units, so we'll use theirs. And sometimes we'd also then use things that we got directly from the people who know the stuff best locally. For instance, sort of like the fire and rescue. When it comes to they have a lot of needs, but when it comes to capacity, any one of their new fire and rescue stations effectively has like a minimum amount of space that they need to do what they do. If they're serving one person or they're serving 500 people, the building still needs to be big enough for all the stuff that they got to do in case somebody calls, right? So it's always 15,000 square feet minimum. So every time you need to, you expand past 15,000 square feet worth of need, you're buying another 15,000 square foot thing. You're not buying a 1 square foot thing to deal with the next person, right? So that's how this thing was built. All right, you did great. We got through all that stuff. We got through all the detail. And what came out of all of this then is we put all this stuff into our model. And what you're seeing here is kind of like the user interface page, just for right now. And what it does is it allows you to select the different scenarios that have been developed, and there can be new scenarios developed any time. So in this case, it's like, oh, this person is looking at, they're going to select the economic development one, or it is selected now, and maybe they're going to a new one. Here they go. Now they clicked on the mixed use development one. It also has a feature to show the build out extent. So a lot of what we're concerned about is full build out. Like, everything effectively is built upon. But there are lots of different iterative stages of growth and change, and we want this model to be able to handle some of those. So you can see it's got like, well, what if we only did a minimal amount of growth? What are the impacts at that stage? What if we were sort of halfway there? What's that, what that stage? So it has that sort of feature as well. And once you've selected that, it tells you two things. It tells you the outputs of the new growth. So in this scenario, it does its does its magic, and it spits out this many number of new units, this kind of water and sewer use, this new assessed value in building value that wasn't there before, and then also provides as best it can sort of like a generalized capacity implication. So, raise your hand if you knew ahead of time that 271,000 gallons of water a day was 5% of your capacity. Everybody? Oh no. Okay. Well, so like it's designed to give you some context into what all this stuff means. So that's the tool that we built with staff as a leave behind, and we hope an enhancement moving forward in any of this sort of work that they want to do. Okay, so with that, we actually get to the good parts, which is more about the findings of these analyses, and I'm going to turn that back over to Steve.
Before we get into the findings, we will have, I know that was hard to see on the screen, we do have examples of the tool up front. You can come take a look at afterwards. We can play with it, show how that moves and changes things. And so, as Jeremy said, we have the different iterations. We have fast, slow, build out, full build out. The numbers you're seeing here are strictly for 90% build out. Let's go to the end and see if we get to that point, what sort of infrastructure needs will we have? So left to right then, we have the comprehensive plan scenario, that kind of cut and paste that Jeremy talked about. The middle is mixed use, and then the far right is economic development. I'm going to show you each of the impacts individually. We do have it aggregated on the board in the back if you want to take a look at it afterwards. So what this means is if the comprehensive plan scenario were to build out at 90%, we could expect in the neighborhood of 4.3 million square feet of commercial. Varying types, not any one type. We do know, for example, the comprehensive plan called for some office in this area. We left that in there for that purpose. It got taken out in some of the other ones. Comprehensive plan would call for 110 new homes, single-family homes, with 0 multifamily homes. Mixed-use scenario would be 2.5 million square feet of commercial, but then it would have more residential, 660 single-family and 2,100 multifamily homes. The economic development scenario, again, that 4.3 million square feet of commercial of a different type, very different type. In that scenario, we brought in some more flex office, we brought in some more industrial. There's a scenario we looked at with and without a data center impact here as well. So a different type of commercial, but then also would still have 220 single family homes and 220 single family and 770 multifamily. Okay, so what does that mean for roads, for example? What does that mean for the transportation network in and around the area? And I want to caution you by saying this is not on any one road. This is not just on Patterson. This is not just on Hockett. This is an aggregate total of what the capacity is in the area. Right now, if you aggregate all of that, there's about a 20,000 trip per day capacity in excess of what's out there now, in excess of who's driving out there today. So you could accommodate 20,000 vehicles per day in under any scenario before making any improvements. So comp plan, though, would generate 28,000 vehicle trips per day, 8,000 more than we have the availability to handle today. So that means we need to start thinking about 2 additional lanes of traffic. Again, I'm not saying that has to be on Patterson, has to be on Hockett, just in the area as a whole. That's what we're talking about. The mixed-use scenario brings a lot more commercial in, a lot more residential in, a lot more trips. There's the need for, we're talking about 70,000 plus trips in excess of what we can handle today. We're talking 6 to 8 lanes of new capacity needed in and around the area. Economic development kind of splits the difference in between, again, because you have some of that industrial type uses that maybe don't generate as much traffic. We're about 47,000 vehicles over what we can handle today. So you're talking 4 to 6 new lanes infrastructure-wise. So now if we go to water and sewer, the top half, the gray half, is the same. I'm not going to go through that again. Those are the same results as far as development. But what does it mean for water and sewer? Well, one of the things we found out today, throughout the course of this study, is that the county, through its existing capacity, its agreements with Henrico and the city, has a lot of a capacity for water and sewer. Now, I'm not talking about individual lines or the extension of any of those lines to those parcels to serve them, but generally, overall, aggregate, kind of like what I was talking about with trips, there's a lot of excess capacity. The comp plan would generate, the need for 230,000 gallons per day of water, 218,000 of sewer. Capacity-wise, that can be handled. Again, lines would need to be run to different parcels, but overall capacity could be handled. The mixed-use scenario, 975,000 plus water, 636,000 of sewer, 750, 608 in the economic development scenario. One of the takeaways from this project is, regardless of the scenario, there is capacity out there for these. Again, we have to make some improvements to some of the systems, but overall, there's capacity for the water and sewer needs of this structure, of this study area. All right, students, classroom space. Everybody knows that the houses generate students, so we met with, and I should have started, before I started all of this, we met with each of the individual departments within the county who represent these: transportation, schools, fire and rescue, economic development, all of them. And so we met with them throughout this process. The comprehensive plan generates only 110 homes, so there's only the need for 40 new students. That's about 3 classrooms. Now, one of the things that we heard throughout this process from the school system was that Randolph Elementary School is at its capacity from a sewer standpoint. You can't just put more trailers on that site. So you can't add another classroom to that school. So there would be a need, as that grows, to rethink that, perhaps redistrict, build a new school, things like that. But comparatively, the comprehensive plan, 40 students, 3 new classrooms. The mixed use, again, we're building more residential, more students, 250, 14 classrooms. Spread across elementary, middle, high school, but again, we're trying to get an aggregate total here. Economic development scenario, 80 students, 5 classrooms. Fire and rescue. As Jeremy said, any new fire and rescue building is 15,000 square feet. You can't just add a little bit more to one. That is the new size that based on the safety standards, based on the police always have a room there as well and a little office space. This is something we met with Chief Ferguson on. 15,000 square feet is that new number. Now, if you're familiar with the area, there is a new fire station planned in the West Creek area, right? So that is on the books. That is being planned for. The site may change around a little bit, but that is something that has been planned for already. So what are each of these scenarios from a facility standpoint? What do they call for? 11,000 square feet of facility space under the comp plan. We've planned for that. We've got that 15,000 on the books. We've planned for that. No new facility needed. Mixed use, 17,000 square feet. Well, now that 15,000 square foot building that we're planning for isn't going to be enough, so we need to start thinking about another one at some point if this gets to full build out. Economic development is right up on that cap. We can hit that with 15,000, no new facility needed. And I will say with all of these, when we look at the size or like a school classroom or a new fire and rescue, we're looking at the facility space. Obviously, there would need to be new teachers, new personnel. How the residential develops in the area would greatly impact the number of teachers and the number of fire personnel. Single family homes, more teachers, less fire because you don't get as many calls. Age restricted, less students, more calls for fire and rescue. So those are things that we're working through in all of this as well. And then finally, we also looked at what could we expect on an annual tax basis from the county, for the county once this is all developed. Again, these are just tax numbers. These aren't numbers of how many people can be accommodated or things like that. Comp plan, about a 6.3 million annual in tax revenue, 3.9 under the mixed use, and 12 under the economic development. Now, I will say that the economic development one, is more volatile because it depends on what comes in. If data center comes in, that number is much higher. If it's more of a flex industrial or office space, that number goes down. So that's a number that changes a lot. And one of the beautiful things about the tool that we have built and that we're leaving behind with county is that we can change these inputs as things progress, right? If for some reason office comes roaring back, well, we can change some of these inputs and get that number back. If the next 5 years ago, nobody was talking data centers, right? Nobody knew anything about them. So if the next big idea comes out, well, that can be adjusted and we can look at this tool in a new light. So that is where we're at today with the study. We're gonna have a little bit of an open house now. Mike's gonna go over some of the details of that. We're gonna invite you to come look at the tool, go around the room, and then we're gonna come back for some questions and answers at the end. But
Thanks, Steve. And I think we're actually going to maybe take a few questions now. But I do just want to go over quickly what our plan is here. So we've set up 3 stations, and we know that was a lot of information. You know, we crunched a lot of numbers, gathered a lot of data to put together this tool that we hope supports the county's planning going forward. And you probably have a lot of questions in your mind, so we want to answer those. And we have a few stations where we plan to do that. Up front here, we have 2 computers where we're glad to show you kind of this tool, you know, change assumptions, change inputs, see how it changes things. Back here we have a couple of boards where we'd love for you to leave questions that you have. The board on the right is specifically about what questions or comments do you have about this study. The board on the left is about ideas you have about how this approach or this tool could be helpful, could be used in future planning. We have Post-it notes you can leave your ideas, and we'll respond to all the questions and post that to the website as the game plan. We can also take several of them here tonight. And then finally, back here is a blown up land bay map in the back right, and also the results that Steve just presented, so we can go into more detail. We have and over here there is a postcard where you can take home. It's got a little QR code on it. You can use your phone to go online and learn more information about the study. So that's the game plan. We'll kind of get up and move around. There's a lot of people here, so we may need to move a few chairs, but I do think before we do that, we're going to take a few questions. And we have a second mic that'll be brought around. Please wait for the mic because there's a YouTube recording going on right now, and then people will be able to hear your question.
Excuse me. Will this slideshow be on the website?
yes, we can make that available.
Thank you. One other question, if I might, on relative to the tax impact, tax revenue impact. Is that gross or net?
It's gross. It's gross.
Has there been an adjustment made for what the tax impact on the residents of the county would be to net that out?
No, it's a great great sort of next step for all of this as it stands now, right? This is just all on top of whatever there is today, but it would be very interesting, I think, to do that.
If you add that many residents or homes or businesses, there's going to be significant tax impact to support that also.
And just to build on that, the improvements that you saw for each of the scenarios, we are costing those out. That would be part of the final report. So those, those new lanes or that new school classroom, that will be part of it, that cost estimate.
Could you explain a little bit about the methodology? Did anybody actually go out and look at this land or fly a drone over it? And did you take into account the coal mines that were here in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries that might have an impact on future development?
I'll start and then please jump in. We did not look at any individual parcel. We did certainly drive and look at the area. We did not go on private property or things like that, or fly a drone over private property. We did not assume that every parcel was, we assumed at 75% build out. So we didn't say, we know that there's going to be wetlands. We know that there's going to be things that are going to happen that you can't build on every square inch of, nor do we want to. So we did take that down to 75%. But we did not go parcel by parcel. Again, master planning kind of thing, land bay by land bay is the approach we took here.
It is worth noting that even when we're talking about full build out, that means 90% of the available land is eligible for use, and 75% of that land actually is considered part of like the calculation. If we were going to do, say, 2 units per acre, it would only be the 75% of the 95%. That's the part that gets carved out. So while we wouldn't know specifics about any individual parcel, or I mean, in the coal mine could be several parcels for all I know, but because it's aggregated, I think that the hope would be that it's effectively captured in the fact that we're already assuming that some things can't be built on at all times. Thank you. It's a great question.
Hello. Can you define multifamily in purposes of this study? Is it condos, townhouses, or apartments?
Townhouses at 12 dwelling units per acre. So a number that is consistent with my guess is, in your mind's eye, what a townhouse looks like. They're about 12 dwelling units per acre. But that's as detailed as we would get for this particular iteration of the tool.
So not a heavy concentration of apartments?
Correct.
And just to follow up, the single families, we assumed at 2.5 units per acre where water and sewer was available, 1 unit per acre where we didn't.
Can you give an example of, a simple example, what is a commercial development and what is industrial for these properties?
Sure. Okay, so commercial really just means non-residential. It's there for commerce. Industrial effectively falls within the wider umbrella of commercial in a real way, and then really just talking about something that creates a product that it sends out. It's some industry, but that can include things it can really include things like warehousing as well, if you want. All of the if there's a concern about sort of like the wider impacts of the kinds of industrial uses that are assumed, these are all technically what are considered light industrial uses, which are the ones that have sort of the most minimal impacts to the surrounding area. So there's no like, oh, we assumed a tire fire burning factor or anything. I mean, these are all things that are meant to be done in a way that can suit a commercial environment.
Would that be a factory?
It probably wouldn't be like a factory that produces smoke. I mean, the chances of that being something that got approved, we probably
what would
assume
it produce?
Oh, good question. What are some of the things? So
I want something
like maybe
concrete.
medical. What are some of the things? What are some of the things that are out there right now that fit? Maybe I'd ask even Tom. Like, what's a company that builds guitar cases? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and more of the higher tech kind of things. We looked at medical research, medical things like that. We're not specifically looking at any sort of factory or in the traditional sense of the word.
And again, I do want to reiterate that none of this is about like what it would become a plan or a policy. It's a way to investigate the infrastructure impacts of all these various types of things. There are all sorts of other things that may be of import as well, and that's why this isn't a policy-making tool. It is a tool that is part of a decision-making process for I think some of the very things that maybe you're thinking about of what it would mean if there was industrial development in this part of the county.
Hi, can you help me understand why on the slide findings in the tax base, under the comp plan, which is kind of status quo, right, moving along, the annual tax revenue is 6.3, and under the mixed use, more homes, you know where I'm going with this, it's like 3.9. So
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
So based on the current tax guidance for Goochland County, so your residential millage rate and then what is charged for commercial uses, residential buildings provide a lot less tax revenue than do commercial buildings. It's really just as simple as that. So the more the land that gets used for residential purposes, effectively the less economically productive the land becomes. This is part of why it's such a great thing to have a mix of residential and commercial uses in a community, because it just costs a lot of, you get a lot less, you get a lot less tax revenue out of a residential unit than you do with the same, like the equivalent space for a commercial. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it's an important thing. An important thing to know, and one of I think sort of the important findings of doing this kind of analysis.
Can you help me? I'm having trouble wrapping my head around the vehicles per day, which I thought was like 80,000 or something, and 3,000 homes. So if each home has 3 people, that's 9,000 people, making 93,000. Like, I'm just trying to wrap my head around how they get to the number of vehicles given the number of homes. It seems like a lot of vehicles per household to me, but I'm sure there's a good explanation. I'm just missing it.
Yeah, so Jeremy kind of walked you through a little bit of that with trips. We looked towards national data from ITE. I'll tell you that the average single-family home is right about between 9 and 10 trips per day. That means you leave for work in the morning, you come back, that's 2 trips. You go out in the middle of the day, you come back. So the average single-family home is right in that 9 to 10 range. So 660 single-family homes is about 6,500 or so trips per day. Multifamily, that number comes down a little bit. Usually there's less people. Maybe there's younger people that live there. That's 6, 7, 8 trips per day range. Depends. Townhomes are a little bit higher than multifamily. But again, that's kind of where we get to that math. But then again, with the mixed use scenario, we are assuming more retail. Fronting Patterson Avenue or something like that, perhaps. Retail brings more trips. That's why the mixed use has the highest number of trips generated.
Or actually 73,000 cars.
Right. So you got to also factor in the 2.5 million square feet of commercial. And so single family and multifamily are real easy calculations to make. I am a traffic engineer. That's what I do as my background anyway. Those are numbers that I know. So we can real quickly get to that. The commercial depends on how much retail, how much office, how much industrial. We've got all those numbers baked in. I'd love to walk through them with you later. But it is an aggregate kind of thing.
Yeah, I had one that's a very big picture kind of question, and maybe it's been asked before, but is it possible to create sort of an analog mindset, what one of these looks like? In other words, the space we're talking about is from, Patterson to Three Chop, from here to there, and it's kind of like Innsbrook, or it's kind of like Innsbrook plus Wellesley. Is there a way to do that, or have you done that? And that was my main question.
Yeah, and please jump in. We have not done that for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want to produce a map or a scenario where we're trying to make an individual parcel or even land-based decision to say, well, you have to have the Innsbrook part of it, or you have to have this part of it. We're trying to aggregate this as a whole. So no, I don't have a good example to point you to of it. It would be like this or like that. We can try and come up with some good examples, but we don't want to produce, at this point, this level of the study was not intended to make those decisions on where things go. And yeah. How big, how many? Oh, yeah, here.
I'm gonna take us back to one of the earlier slides. Here we are. All right, so there's a map of Goochland County. Our study area is that little white spot, that little white circle. And then the map over there might be most helpful in sort of determining, some of the street names or some, there's the golf course, whatever. That's maybe the best version. I would say to follow up on what Steve said too. When we get to the point of like this one has X million number of square feet, I mean what constitutes, I think, ultimately like the one place being like a success in your mind versus a failure has as much to do with sort of like the design of the place as it does with any of this sort of stuff. And so you can make any of these be beautiful and welcoming, and you can make any of them the exact opposite. And there's a lot more that goes into it than just the numbers. And I think we were a little concerned about the prospect of maybe coming with it, because we talked about this very thing, like can people visualize this? It's really difficult. But it comes down to like that there can also be a value judgment in just the picture, and we didn't want anybody to get sort of an impression, and that's what it was. So I do apologize for it being difficult to wrap one's head around. It's hard to contextualize these numbers for sure, but that's at least where our heads were, if that makes sense.
We'll take like 2 more, and then we're going to open it up to interact, and we can come back and answer some more at the end.
It might be helpful, too, just following up on what that gentleman said, to have some type of a point of reference or benchmark. And I think about 2.5 million square feet of commercial. That's probably bigger than Short Pump, right? When I think about 4.3 million square feet of commercial, I don't know what that would be the equivalent of. So as you think about this, to have some type of point of reference or benchmarks goes back to feasibility, I guess.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. I would, with any, oh.
One of the outputs here that it will show you is, can you see this one?
Yep.
2.5 times the existing commercial square footage of the overall the overall study area of what's out there now. So this version, that's what 2.5. At least that's some modicum of contextualizing what 2.5 million square foot means relative to what's there today.
You're talking about the comp plan, the 2.5.
Just whichever of the scenario. Once you plug it in, it tells you. It gives you that output. So I'd be happy to show you later. But so there is at least an attempt at doing that very thing. But I think it would be kind of fun to have an add-on that's like, here's some of the other things that exist in your mind's eye and how much they have. I think that would really help people.
But what we will do is we will answer that question. We'll put it up on the website to give you an idea of Short Pump is X, this is that. Within that, I would like you to keep in mind that we're not talking about this is a much larger area than Short Pump. So if we say it's going to be exactly the same as Short Pump, we're not putting it on that small of a parcel. It's going to be spread out across the whole study area. So, but we will answer that question. How about one more, and then we'll break for a minute.
So carrying on with that thought, what square footage exists today in this study area, and what percentage would that increase it by?
I will double check that right here, and we could even show and look, but yeah, I hesitate to do it off of this sort of clicking through the buttons to make sure, but the existing commercial square footage number is rooted in what's actually out there. There's a good chance it's 1 million square feet, but I will make sure to check and have that be one of the things that gets answered for sure.
All right, so we're going to take a few minutes. We've got the posters over here. We'd love to hear your questions, your thoughts. We can walk you through the model up front. We've got the results in the back we can answer questions on. We welcome your comments. This study gets better and better each time we meet with you, each time we hear from your comments and your questions. So thank you for that. We encourage you to come interact with all of us, and we'll come back and answer some more questions in a little bit.
big mic? So 1 and 2? Speaker mic, where's Mike? Mike the speaker. So it's on.
Just wanted to, oops, sorry. See if there's any other overall questions for the group. I know people have cleared out a little bit, but happy to answer any other questions that people may have.
Folks, if not, thank you. Have a good night. Mike's off.
That's good. Here we go.
You know, when at the end, it took just a second to kind of explain, like, oh,
It's a lot
yeah,
of information.
yeah. I think
I
we're,
don't think so.
yeah, yeah, you're good. Should we, hey, thanks, everybody.